so everybody's here to talk about OASIS Plus Phase 2. Obviously, we had the RFP, the Amendment 8, released around January 13th. Hopefully, you've had a chance to digest that. If not, no worries. The point of this webinar is to walk you through things at a high level, make sure you're tracking the important changes and updates, especially if you're one of those Phase 1 awardees who's looking to expand your domains, or if you were not successful during Phase 1 and you're trying to figure out what you can fix for this go round, or if you're brand new to OASIS Plus, welcome. Everybody's welcome here. We have all kinds of clients, and we're really excited to be with you today. So a couple things we're going to cover today. Obviously, the changes and updates that came with Phase 2, what the proposal elements are. We have a recommended schedule for you. We're going to talk a little bit about how and when to use the project verification forms and past performance questionnaire, because those were attachments as part of the solicitation, and this is just something that comes up pretty frequently with bidders. We're going to do a real quick crash course on Symphony, and then we're going to give you some recommendations for areas to watch and what you should be doing now. So without further ado, let's jump into it. If you are new to Trident, welcome. We think of ourselves as a wonderful organization, but we're happy that you're here. We are a small business, headquartered as much as any business is in these remote days in Southern California. That was actually where I joined Trident, but I'm a military spouse. I'm a Navy veteran. I've moved all over the world. I've been with Trident for about 11 years, and it's been great to have some career continuity in that time. You know, as OASIS has come and gone and come back around. But if you've ever worked with us, one of the things that we always harp on and are really proud of are our core values, because we think this is what sets us apart. So if you, again, have worked with us, you'll hear us talk about military level professionalism and teamwork and client-centric excellence and owning the outcome, and really embracing this idea of thriving. And that just means that we really encourage everybody to be their authentic selves and to, prioritize work appropriately, but just understand where that fits into the bigger picture of being a good human. So we hope that you have great experience when you work with us, because we spend a lot of time talking about these things internally and really trying to embody them. Core focus. Obviously, you're here because you're probably a prospective government contractor or current government contractor who's looking to identify, position for, and win, because that's the whole point, government contracts, using this professional staff that Trident provides to get quality service. So again, spend a lot of time making sure that our team is oriented to that core goal that we have. And something else that's really unique about Trident is our core commitment. And as I mentioned, I'm a military spouse. I'm a Navy veteran. Many of the people who work at Trident share some or all of those qualities. And it's because we're committed to creating flexible and portable job opportunities for drilling reservists, veterans, and spouses of active duty military all over the world. So if you've ever worked with Morgan, she's out in Guam. You may have met me when I was stationed, or when my husband rather was stationed in Japan. I'm out in Hawaii these days. So again, if my internet is glitchy, it's just because maybe it needs to go enjoy a little walk in paradise. It usually comes back pretty quick though. Just want to also mention that if you've been following us on LinkedIn, we're really excited to share that we are being inducted into the Military Spouse Employment Partnership Program. We actually joined in 2025, but we're attending the formal induction ceremony this year in Washington, D.C. And it's happening on the same day that we are receiving our Hire Vets Medallion Award. So we're actually going to have 2 Trident reps bopping around DC at the end of the month, and we're really excited for that. Okay, awesome. So this is me, Rebecca Wayland. You've probably talked to me if you've heard about any Polaris or Oasis or Seaport or Soup or any of those really fun endeavors that we've been in the trenches together on. I am a 2006 Naval Academy graduate, surface warfare officer, reformed surface warfare officer. I'm the strategic vehicle campaign manager at Trident, and as I mentioned, I'm going on year 11 here. Somehow, time has flown. I'm also the co-author of the Fast Prop process. So if you're Shipley trained, that's fantastic. If you do proposals in the real world like the rest of us, where you don't have unlimited resources and unlimited time, you might want to check out Fast Prop, because that's basically our quick start guide to the really important activities that you need to do. And we spend a lot of time in that guide talking about the rationale and the order of operations and those kind of things to kind of keep you on track, because you go into proposals with the team you have, not the dream team always. So just helping you figure out how to prioritize and accomplish things is kind of the goal of that guide. And then I also sing baritone in the Honolulu Blend show chorus. So a little fun fact about me. That's one of the really cool things about we've actually been geostable for the last 3.5 years, and we have a subsequent tour here, which is the first time that's ever happened in the the 20-something years that I've been with my husband. So I'm getting a little bit more established in the community. And you can check out Honolulu Blend if you are curious at all about female barbershop a cappella singing. So not related to Trident, but a fun fact. Okay. I know you guys are here for the Oasis Plus. You're not here to listen to me sing. So we'll get on with it here. A lot of things didn't actually change with phase two, which is kind of what we were expecting, right? This is an on-ramp. This isn't a totally new contract. So we knew that there was going to be a lot of consistency between phase one and phase two. So recapping on this slide, it's still 6 separate IDIQs, and this is really important to understand as you get into deconflicting what you're eligible to compete for. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But just as a refresher, there's an unrestricted, which is basically the large business IDIQ. There's a small business IDIQ, women-owned small business, service-disabled veteran-owned small business, hub zone, and 8A. You are permitted to pursue as many of those as you qualify for. You just have to be selective about your domains and the projects that you use to qualify, because there are restrictions there. For this phase two, they are accepting new bidders. So if you missed phase one or didn't have the projects to qualify or had some other reason for not being part of phase one, that's okay. You're welcome here. If you're adding domains, I call it domain enhancement because it sounds a little bit fancier, but it's domain modification. So if you have maybe T&E or M&A already, there are some new domains that you could pursue, but all of the original 8 domains are also open, and we'll cover those so that you get that reorientation to that. And it's also open for lateral springboards. And this is really exciting for some of the small businesses, especially because maybe you own, or maybe you were awarded a small business IDIQ, and in the last, 2 years and change, maybe your company status has changed, and maybe now you're a hub zone. And so you can apply basically to have your small business IDIQ using those points and projects. You can apply for the hub zone now without having to do a completely new proposal. So that's the lateral springboard option. The other thing that didn't change, this is still a scorecard evaluation, which if you talk to any of our Trident's OASIS Plus reps, we love these because it's about the clearest picture that you can have when you submit a proposal. It's not the narrative, or is my management approach going to be good enough? Is my technical solution going to be good enough? This is a really clear, I think I have the evidence and I know what my score is going to be before I bid. We'll talk about our eligibility check, but it's just nice to know ahead of submitting the proposal and sending it in that all of your hard work is likely to pay off. So this is one of those contracts where if you are qualified, you will get an award. So as long as you follow the letter of the law and all of the nuance embedded in that OASIS Plus solicitation, we can get you a contract award. It is open for joint ventures, CTAs, and you can team on OASIS Plus to round out your scorecard, basically. Just make sure you look for those restrictions on project contributions and duplications, and we'll talk more about that as we go. And what's really interesting about phase two is that there's no closing date, right? This is now a continuously open solicitation. There's a little caveat there, you'll see in my notes, that this does not mean that it won't at some point have an amendment or be closed to just sort of stem the number of applicants. And I do expect that we'll see some refreshes as we go along here. Very much like GSA's multiple awards schedule, right? Where every 2 to 3 months they refresh the solicitation, they send it out, and everybody has to comply with the new version of guidance. So it doesn't mean that this contract is stagnant. It's going to live like this forever. But we do expect the changes to be a little bit more incremental as this goes. Okay, so as promised, just a real quick recap of the domains. What you see on the left, those are the sort of original phase one domains. All of those are still open to bidders responding to phase two. The new domains that were added, there's 5 of them. It's financial services, human capital, business administration, marketing and PR, and social services. Kind of surprised that all of these came to fruition, just given the government contracting landscape of 2025, but we'll take it. The minimum qualification scores remained unchanged. So again, just as a refresher, if in the small business domain, you need to get 36 of the 50 available credits. I had too much coffee this morning. I'm sorry. I'm going to slow myself down. In the unrestricted domain, the threshold's a little bit higher. You need to get 42 credits of the available 50. And then there's this one really special domain, the enterprise services domain, where you actually need 45 out of 50 points. And in order to qualify. Okay, and I just got a chat saying you can't see my slides, so I'm going to take them off the screen and try to put them back on, and hopefully they come back. But please do use that chat if you're not seeing what I am presenting, because that's an important part of this webinar. So let's see. Let's see if they come back. The beginning of the presentation. So let's skip ahead. Okay. Hopefully they came back. Okay, great. All right, so maybe some technical difficulties in other areas, but that's okay. That gave us a great chance to check out the chat and the Q&A. So thank you for keeping me honest there. So if you're reading through any of the synopsis of OASIS Plus, sometimes you see that they'll say there's 12 domains. There's 12 domains in the small business IDIQs, because this enterprise services domain, which if you look at the scorecard requires massive projects, it only exists in the unrestricted domain. So you can't be a small business and pursue all 13. I think it's mathematically impossible for you to be a small business and qualify for the enterprise services domain, just based on the project size and thresholds. Although, every time I say that, there's an exception that proves the rule. So if you're out there, get in touch. Okay, proposal elements. There are some changes here that I want to point out. So in phase 1, they actually called these different volumes. Now they're just sections. So in section 1, this is kind of your standard company documentation. Quick note that if you subscribe to the GSA Small Business Interact community, they did publish a notice today and say, hey, don't worry, we uploaded the SF33s. We left that out unintentionally when we released Amendment 8. So the SF33s are up now, and that will be part of your kind of section 1 information. If you're bidding as part of a joint venture, if you have subcontractors, this is the area where all of that information is going to go. Meaningful relationship commitment letters, I'm going to talk about these for just a second. So if you are using the projects from a subsidiary or an affiliate, you're permitted to do that on OASIS Plus. You're also permitted to take credit if you're the prime and you have an affiliate that's part of your official organizational structure. And let's say that your DCMA, approved accounting system is actually in their name. You can use that for credit if you have this meaningful relationship commitment letter that explains the relationship between the entities, lays out what it is. We have a template for this if you need one, but you have to show what your relationship is, and then there's only a few kinds that are approved for this, but it does give the smaller businesses a little bit of wiggle room, so that it's not that every subsidiary has to have their own individual approved accounting system. And I just use that as an easy example because that's where we tend to see this come up. And similarly with past performance, right? If you've gone through novations, if you've had mergers and acquisitions and you've acquired other companies, so maybe the contract that you're using as qualifying performance isn't in your name of the company today, it's in a previous name, that's okay, as long as you show the trail of breadcrumbs, right? We'll talk about that a lot as we're going through OASIS Plus. Also just want to mention that you will have to do your SAM reps inserts, and there's also Section K reps inserts, so pay close attention to what's required there. And then, as I mentioned, if you had mergers, acquisitions, novations, any kind of that history of your company, that's going to help an evaluator understand why you're submitting the projects you are. This is the place to put that information. Now, I've put this last bullet on here. It's a separate section in the solicitation that was not here on phase 1. And the reason is because if you submitted for phase 1 and you were unsuccessful, as part of phase 2, you need to respond to the letter you got and basically tell GSA what you did to correct all those things. But I've not seen in the solicitation, and I haven't found it in Symphony yet. That's not to say it doesn't exist. I'm not sure where this is going to get uploaded. So I just wanted to make sure that we talked about it today. Because again, if you tried to go after phase 1, you were not successful, you do have to respond and submit that response to GSA. And I presume it's going to be in one of the company information sections for Symphony. So it's a standalone, it's an L.5.9 now. Check that out if you haven't already, and expect more to follow about specific instructions about where to upload that. Section 2, qualifying project experience. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about this because this is where the lion's share of the points come from. I'm not going to get into all the nuances today of the differences in the scorecards, but I will just say if you have just top high-level questions about OASIS Plus, you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Kylie, reach out to Trident, and we'll do a free 30-minute consultation, and we'll just talk you through like where you're at and what questions you have, because I know this is a lot, especially if you're new to OASIS Plus as a program. It's a lot to get your arms around. So please feel free to set up a call. We'll have contact information published at the end of this brief. We'd be happy to talk through things with you, because it's a little bit different than what you might have done before. Okay, so qualifying project experience. You can use qualifying project experience from teammates. Just make sure you pay attention to the scorecard nuances between the domains. I always mention that because sometimes people will say, well, hey, I want to go after the management and advisory domain. I say, great, and we grade them for that. And then they say, I'm also interested in logistics. I say, great, we grade them for that. And they end up with two very different scores. And they go, well, wait a second, I have really good projects. Why is my score not the same? It's because the scorecards aren't the same, right? So what counts in one domain may not be applicable in another. Research and development, right? That one is one that I always draw people's attention to, because the minimum qualifying threshold for the projects is higher than in some of the other domains. It's also, there's different factors that apply as it relates to getting credit for advanced R&D projects, for example, in the federal experience section. So it's really important that you understand what the point of the domain is, right? Why it exists. And then you look at the scorecard nuances to make sure that, it's not just work that you want to do, but that your projects will score well against those areas. And we can help with all that. I also want to point out, if you've ever worked with us, we're always going to tell you, you have to read the whole solicitation. And in the case of OASIS Plus, you have to do that, and you have to read all of the attachments. And there's like 20 all told that you need to get into. But related to qualifying project experience, the three that are going to be the most helpful to you, other than the solicitation and the scorecard, are the project verification form, because this is where you're going to write out your 1,000-character explanation of relevance if you need to, but it's going to walk you through exactly what kind of criteria you're going to need for each project. The JP4 is an Excel sheet, and it's actually the domain auto-relevant NICS and PSC codes. So we'll talk about this in a little bit, but basically the way to get the highest score is to have a good concentration of relevant projects. And there's a shortcut button to do that, where if you have a task order, if you have a contract that's coded with a certain NICS code or includes a certain PSC code, you may not have to go through the whole 1,000-character explanation of why that's relevant. You might be able to cite that NICS or PSC code in lieu of providing that 1,000-character written narrative. And then the JP5 is the other thing that have to mention. This is where you're going to see a really good description of what the domains and functional areas are. So before you start looking at your projects, get into the solicitation, get into the scorecard, and get into these three attachments so that you're in the right frame of mind to evaluate your projects before you turn anything in. And then the other thing I just want to mention is that you need to make sure that your relevance claims make sense. And I don't mean from well, this is technical and engineering, so it just needs to match to technical and engineering. That's part of it. But if you're pursuing multiple domains, and you're using the same projects to do that, you are permitted to say, hey, I have this contract, and on this contract, I did work that was relevant to technical and engineering, and I did work that was relevant to management and advisory. You can do that as long as you can show that you met the minimum annual average threshold for each domain in that contract. And where we see people get into a little bit of trouble is if they have a contract that was their average annual value was $600,000, which is great, right? That meets the definition or one criteria of a qualifying project. But if you say, and I did $500,000 every year that was relevant to T&E, and I also did $500,000 every year that was relevant to M&A, it's not as clear as just adding up those values, but it does raise some eyebrows if you say, yeah, my total contract value for the year was $600,000, but there was $500,000 of each of these. There's that much overlap in the services. That starts to get a little sketchy. So if you run through an eligibility check with us, we're going to flag that and just say, hey, the cleaner thing to do would be to find another project. GSA along the way has been really hesitant to say that you can't do that, or to say that you are limited to only, that you can't claim more than the average annual value of the project. But I will just tell you, on the JP3, you have to write what your average annual value is. And then in each domain that you're claiming, you have to repeat back to them and say, I understand the threshold for T&E is 500,000 and I'm claiming this, and here is my total contract value. So all of those figures are going to be on the same JP3 form. So they're going to be able to know if you're really claiming, $2 million worth of work on a $600,000 contract. So it just gets a little, you're kind of operating in a gray area if you're doing that. And then the other thing I will mention here is that past performance on these contracts does matter. And there's some nuances there that we'll dive into when we get to some of the other sections. I'm going to drop anchor on this topic because we spend a lot of time educating our clients, which is fine, on the definition of a qualifying project. So if you don't understand this, you're not going to be looking for the right type of qualifying work as you build your OASIS Plus proposal. So to be considered a qualifying project, it has to meet all 5 of these qualifying criteria. These are the minimum criteria, by the way, right? So it has to be a certain kind of work, right? It could be a single contract. It could be a single task order. It could be a task order under a federal supply schedule or BPA. It can be an OTA. If you remember phase 1, they didn't permit these for a while, then they did, and they're kind of wishy-washy, but OTAs are okay as qualifying projects. And you can use a collection of task orders if it's on a single award IDIQ. Caveat here is that you can only use one of those per domain. So let's say we pass the first thing. We have a task order that we got under Seaport. Hooray. Wonderful. The next thing you need to look at was this a contract or order for services as defined in FAR Part 37? If you were doing construction work, if you were selling computers, if you were selling, laptops, that might not be a services contract. If those were tangential to what you were doing, or if you were doing a bundled solution, right, where you did services and products, you might be able to use that project. But there are some kinds of projects that just do not qualify. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. So don't overlook this part, because when you upload your QPs into Symphony, you're going to have to show how your project meets all 5 of these criteria. So putting that seed in. And I see a question in the chat. I'm going to get to that shortly. The next thing that you need to look at is making sure that your project meets or exceeds a minimum average annual value. That is a mouthful, based on which domain you're applying for, right? This is one of those values that can change based on the domain you're applying to. And also, if you've looked at that JP1, that attachment, there's a small business scorecard for each domain, and then there's the unrestricted scorecard for each domain, and they have different minimum average annual values listed at the very top. So right under where it says facilities domain, on the next line down, it's going to tell you what the dollar threshold is for those projects. Next thing you need to know is that it needs to be ongoing with at least 6 months of completed performance. Unless the project is complete, in which case you're really just looking at making sure it clears the minimum value. And then you cannot have an associated record of negative past performance. So you have to at least have satisfactory, so a 3.0 average or higher, in order to use something as a QP. And this is really important because when you enter your project into Symphony, on the very first page where you say, this is my contract number, and this was my period of performance, and this is my value, if you get down to the bottom, it's going to ask you, what was your past performance rating? And you're going to have to type in a number, and you're going to have to upload a file before it even lets you add it as a project to the system. And that is different than the past performance credits, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Okay, sorry guys, I'm going to look over at the chat because I know I've seen some OTA as a sub. Okay, we'll talk about OTAs and how they count as prime or not prime work. And then documentation required, we're going to get into that as well. So sorry, just be patient with me, and I'll stick to my script so I don't get totally waylaid, but we will circle back on those questions. Okay, so real quick, and again, you don't have to worry about writing any of this down because we're going to send you the deck, but I just want to point out that if you go to the FAR companion, because I'm going to go back one slide. If you look at this RFO, right, that's the new revised FAR, the revolutionary FAR overhaul is that RFO, right? So that means you got to look at the new clause because that one's in effect for this. If you pull it up, this says, service contracts may encompass, and then it gives you a whole list of things. This is not all inclusive, but just to kind of give yourself a little bit of orientation, like if you're doing these kind of things, you're probably going to pass the bar. If your NICS code that's assigned says services, or there's certain PSCs even that you can look up in usaspending.gov that will say that will lend credence basically to the idea that you were doing services. If you had a statement of work and involved labor, right, that's a good indication that it was a services-based contract. But there's no easy, like, just look at this field in FPDS and then it will tell you. Like, it's unfortunately not that cut and dry, but there are some indicators that you should be looking for along the way if that's in question for you. For most people, it's not an issue, but it's one of those, like, as soon as that becomes an issue, it's a real issue that we got to figure out. So okay, real quick note about how to calculate total contract or on total contract and average annual values. So really important to understand, if your project is done, if it ended in 2025, it's dead and over with, you only get credit for what was actually obligated to the contract, because no more money is coming, right? The period of performance has ended. What's done is done. It is in the past. What is undone remains undone. And that is the value that you need to use for your calculation. For ongoing projects, so something that started 2 years ago and you still have 3 years, because you can use all the options, and in fact, you're required to calculate it for all the options that may be valued. You can use the contract ceiling or the task order ceiling, inclusive of all option periods. So I'll show you in FPDS what those two different records look like on the next slide. But the formula is that you're going to take the total value of the contract divided by the total days. So this is not something that you can fudge and say, well, I want to do it by months and then change the formula here. Nope. Like, you have to take the start date and the end date and total up the number of days between them. So, 466 or 1210 or whatever your period of performance was, and then multiply that by 366 to account for leap years. And this is the formula that's in the solicitation. This is not Rebecca making it up. And that's how your average annual value is going to be determined. Really important point here. I told you you could use a project that was less than 12 months. So if it was a 9-month project, if it was a 3-week project, it doesn't really matter if it's done, but you have to make sure that your average annual value, you're not allowed to annualize it, is the instance here. So basically, if you did $1 million project over the course of 3 months, that's great. You don't get to multiply that project out and say, well, had it existed for a year, it would have been $4 million. Like, no. What it was is what it was. We don't add to it. We don't extrapolate out. The only time you can forecast what a value might be is for a project that is ongoing. Okay, so some examples here, and I'm sorry, I know this is teeny tiny text. The project at the top, this is just a sample FPDS record. I just went in and pulled a random contract. So you can see that the estimated ultimate completion date and actually the completion date are both in the past. So for this one, we would be looking at that top line action obligation, because this is what was actually obligated against the contract. So we would have to use this $43,000 as our contract value, not the 53. Out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to just acknowledge that this would not be a qualifying project because it does not meet the threshold. So please don't say, oh, well, Rebecca showed me a project that was only $43,000. No, I'm not saying it's okay. I'm just showing this for mathematical purposes. But this would be an instance where you calculate your average value based off of that top line. On the project below, you can see that the estimated ultimate completion date is in the future. And this one you'd be permitted to claim I think it's a 5 or 6. I don't know. I don't have my glasses handy today. And my team's projection is teeny tiny, so $6,000. Sorry, made it a little bit bigger for my old eyes here. In this case, your period of performance, because it extends in the future, the project is ongoing, you would be permitted to use that $6 million as your total contract value. If you have questions about that, get in touch with us. We can help. Okay. Definitions of federal prime contractor experience. This is a separate area from your qualifying projects. Your qualifying projects are what you're going to use to really show relevance and get a lot of the points around like integrated experience and management and staffing and that kind of stuff. The federal experience is a different area. It's usually green on the scorecard, right? So look for those rows. And this can also come from your teammates. So that's a great kind of flexibility that GSA has built into this, but there are some scorecard nuances between the different domains. So understanding that it doesn't apply in every single domain, or not all of these apply in each one. For example, the cost reimbursement type contracts and the advanced R&D credit, those only exist in the R&D domain. So if you're applying to M&A and you're like, oh, I used, cost plus fixed fee, like that's terrific. It gives us credence that you have an improved accounting system. You do not get credits, though, for those on the scorecard under the federal experience project types. Okay, so a little bit different definition here of qualifying federal experience projects, since where that OTA question is going to come back up. So you have to be a prime on a contract, grant, cooperative agreement, or other transaction, and it has to be between you and the federal government. So if you are in a consortium and the OTA gets awarded to the consortium and not to you directly, and you can usually tell because if you pull up the FPDS record, it's going to say, awardee. And if the consortium is listed there, unfortunately, you are not considered the prime, even though we know that the consortium exists to basically just do the administrative functions of the contract, and your company might be the one, the entity that's actually performing the work. On phase one, we fought that, and they said, no, like if you are not the prime as defined here and listed in FPDS, then you will not be considered the prime, and you cannot use this as a federal project. I would encourage you to submit questions to GSA and point out how that penalizes maybe small businesses in particular, or commercial entities, the non-traditional government contractors that the OTAs kind of exist to support. You might just consider submitting that question for reconsideration. It's been a few years. There's probably new people in the seats. It might be worth making the argument again just to say, hey, if we have a performer agreement, or with this one exception of OTAs, can we redefine what a prime is? But as it exists today, if you are not the entity that's listed on FPDS, basically, you're not going to be considered the prime vendor on that project. Okay, a couple other definitions here for the qualifying federal experience projects. Similarly, this is kind of the same thing that we saw in the previous slide, except you are permitted to use SBIR and SITRs in the federal experience category only. So you can't use them as qualifying projects, but you can use them for a federal experience. They still need to meet or exceed this annual value. It's $250K a year, so it's a little bit smaller. And this is really great for those one-off task orders if you're trying to show diversity of clients, or just show that you had competition in a multiple award task order environment, for example. And if you're bidding as a mentor protege, an SBA approved mentor protege, your threshold's a little bit lower. So it's $125,000 annually. And then the same kind of idea here, where it has to be ongoing with at least 6 months of completion, or completed within 5 years from proposal submission. This is something that changed between phase one and phase two, right? With phase one, because we had an end date, even though it kept creeping. That was kind of the 5-year guide. They had proposal release and they had the end year. With this one, it's all about everything's queued to your proposal submission date. And then again, has to be a contract or order for services. So don't forget that with your federal experience projects. You can't just pull off, any, like if you had a SOUP 5 task order and it was all for laptops, like probably not going to get credit here for that work. Okay. Other instances, the systems rate and clearances, this section, this is where you would submit your adequate accounting system. The facility clearance, these are credits that, by the way, have to come from the prime. If someone on your team has a facility clearance, that's fantastic. You're not going to get credit for it. The rates, systems, and clearances and the certifications need to be in the name of the prime offerer. So please don't lose sight of that. It might be great for your team overall if all of your teammates have these things. Just know that it's not a credit area. And then there's a certification section. So CMMI, there's multiple ISO certs that have been added as a function of the domain expansions. So please take a look at those. And then CMMC level 2 is now a credit area in some domains. So again, I just put this flag of this scorecard nuances, right? Like you got to get into the scorecard. You got to look at what you're trying to go for to understand how realistic of a bid you really have. This blue banner that you see at the bottom, this is actually a screenshot from Symphony. It's this is a concern that you might have if you bid on OASIS Plus Phase 1, where maybe you had an ISO cert that you claimed credit for, and maybe that ISO cert is expired. Or maybe, in a better happening, you have a cert that you didn't have before. What they're telling you is that if you have something and it's in your company profile and it's still valid, you can reuse it on this proposal. But it's up to you to make sure that the latest version has been uploaded and tagged and filed appropriately. If you don't do that, then you can't say like, oh, well, I had this ISO cert and I just forgot to claim it, but I had the old one, so it should be okay. Like, no, you can change things in there. It's not supposed to affect previous proposal submissions. But I will just mention that if you're an OASIS Plus Phase 1 contract holder, and there's been a change in something like your facility clearance status or ISO cert or anything you took credit for in the first round, you're supposed to send a message via FedConnect to let the contracting officer know about the change, and then you need to update Symphony. But please do make sure that you have done your due diligence in alerting and sending the message in FedConnect to let the contracting officer know of your change in status. Okay, past performance. I'm going to get through this slide. We got a couple other sections, and then I'm going to jump back to the questions and make sure I've answered everything. Okay, so past performance. We get asked this question a lot, like, I have CPARs, but they're not great. Could I just get a past performance questionnaire signed? The answer is no. If your CPARs exist, you have to submit your most recent CPARs, your most recent finalized version of CPARs. Even if it's been archived. I think they archive them after about 3 years. It's feasible that you could have a project that ended 4 years ago. You're within the 5-year periodicity. Maybe you don't have CPARs anymore because you're new to the company and the person used to manage the library, they didn't get turned over, whatever. Guess what? If they exist in the system, you have to use them. So you got to do the legwork to go and get those. If you are unable to, but you know that they exist, you need to submit a paper. Basically, it says, hey, we tried to get them, couldn't do it for these reasons, and then GSA is going to figure out if they're going to accept that or not. If you don't have CPARs, especially like maybe you have them at the IDIQ level, but they don't mention your task order that you're using. If you don't have CPARs for your project, you need to get a JP6 signed. What's interesting about Phase 2 is that they've said or equivalent. So they've acknowledged that there are some agencies who use something that's very close to CPARs, and as long as it has the same grading areas, you'll be permitted to submit that. This is going to be one of those like case by case, need to look at it things. My risk averse advice is to prep a JP6 and just be prepared to get that signed by the client. Rather than use an alternate form, because I know they said you could do it. I just you have to make sure that it matches identically. That doesn't make sure it matches what the criteria are, so that you have the same areas being evaluated. Because again, you're having to determine a numerical score for each past performance to make sure that you are. It has to be at least satisfactory to use it as a QP, but in order to get credits for the past performance area on the score sheet, it has to be a positive rating. So it has to be above a 3.0. A couple other things to talk about here. This is true for both the JP3 and the JP6. The way this works is a little bit different than other proposals you may have done. You send the form to the customer, they sign it and send it back to you. It gets submitted with your proposal. So this isn't something that they're sending off to GSA. You're going to know when it comes back to you what they rated you at. And it has happened where a client thinks they're going to get a positive rating and they get the JP6 back and they realize it's a 3.0 and they go, well, that's not going to help us. And we really need that credit. So they might actually sub in a whole other project based on what this past performance rating comes back at. So just mention that. You cannot get past performance credits on the score sheet, right, in the past performance area for non-relevant QPs. You are permitted to submit a non-relevant QP in a domain, and you might do that if it's like especially large or complex and you're making up a lot of points on the scorecard, but you cannot factor it in to your overall past performance average. And I know we've talked about this on previous webinars, but if you're new to this, the nuance of past performance is that there's a maximum of 3 past performance credits on every scorecard in every domain, right? And it's not a 1-to-1 equivalency. So if you have 5 relevant QPs and each of them had a 5.0 CPARS, you're going to max out at 3 credits. In order to get 1 credit, you have to have at least 3 past performances that have a positive past performance rating. So 3 past performances equal 1 credit, 4 past performances equal 2 credits, 5 past performances equal 3 credits. Really important to understand that so that you don't artificially inflate your score. Okay, everybody has to do a cost price template. The good news is it's not that painful. The government gives you the basically the rate caps for the 20 labor categories that exist. 19 or 20, I think it's 20 this go around. And you have to bid on all of them, even if they're labor categories you would never ever provide, you still have to provide these. And basically think of it like your catalog, where you're agreeing to not bid above the max rates. Along with the cost price template, which is one of the attachments in the solicitation that you're going to spend your time reading, you have to submit a basis of estimate for direct labor rates if what you're proposing, if the rates you're proposing are higher than what the maximums are. Maximums look to be pretty generous, so this would just be one of those cases where you can bid higher than those rates if you can prove that it's realistic. So basically, if you've done it before and you have the documentation to back it up, you can do that. Everyone needs to do a basis of estimate for indirect cost rates unless you have basically a forward pricing rate agreement or approved rates, in which case you can submit those in lieu of this basis of estimate. But they want to see how you determined your indirect costs. A couple miscellaneous notes here, right? They give you escalation. It's going to be 4.41%. They give you profit in certain circumstances. So 7.5 is kind of your planning number. You're bidding the SME rate, so you don't have to do the SME, senior, junior. You're just bidding SME. And then it's important to note too that there are a number of instances where these ceiling rates don't apply, right? So it's only in certain circumstances that you're saying this is the max I will bid. So really encourage you to get into that cost price volume because there's a lot of nuance there. Just don't be intimidated by it. It's not as bad as it looks, is what I'll say there. Okay, last section. Is the responsibility section. So this is where you're going to turn in a professional employee compensation plan. Yes, everybody needs to do this. An uncompensated overtime policy. Yes, everybody needs to do this. The financial resources, we get a lot of questions about this. They've actually given us a JP13 this time, where you're going to put your previous 3 years of financial data. They are not accepting the GSA Form 527. They are not accepting tax returns. You need to follow the instructions here to the letter. And I would expect that if you have anything that might appear negative, you probably just need to provide a little bit of a justification of what's going on. So they just need to make sure that, your whole business is not dependent on the success on this one contract. They need to make sure you're fiscally responsible and that you're not going to go out of business in the middle of delivery. Cybersecurity and supply chain risk management. This just starts with the questionnaire, and then you have to submit a finalized plan after award. But for the proposal submission purposes, it's just the basic phase 1 questionnaire. And then if you are in other than small business, you need to submit an individual or commercial subcontracting plan. So if you're applying to that unrestricted domain or you have one of those proposals, you need to do a small business subcontracting plan. And they give you a template for both the individual or the commercial within the attachments. Okay, this is a good time to pause and take a look at question recap. Hopefully I have some good answers. Okay, if all the projects are based on subcontracts, I'm still going to put a pin in that one because I have a slide coming up where we talk a little bit about that. Facility clearance certs count of coming from the mentor and small business mentor protege. Yes, that's one of those exceptions where, probably the mentor protege, or sorry, the joint venture itself, the facility clearance is not going to be in that name. So as long as one of the entities has it, you can use that for credit. FEP must be a prime award, but QPs can be prime awards or subcontractors. That is correct. If you're using a qualifying project, that can be work that you have done as a subcontractor. It can be work that you did commercially, or it could be prime federal experience. There's multiple kinds of projects that you can use for the QP. For the federal prime experience, that's prime only. But for the QPs, again, where the lion's share of the points come from, you could do it with all subcontracts in theory. Okay. 5 years past performance, strike point from date of solicitation or another date. It's queued to your proposal submission date. So as long as something happened, 5 years from when you submit, because again, since this is continuously open, maybe you're submitting in January, maybe you're submitting in July, and that, you could have something that's right on the border. So for some of you, this means that you're going to need to accelerate your bids and get them in quickly so that you still have projects that are viable. For other people, it might mean that you delay your bid because you need that 6 months of runtime. And then you do not need a small business subcontracting plan for SDV OSB, because hopefully you're representing as a small business in all of those CLINs and you won't be considered an other than small business. So, okay, and then a couple other, well, you guys are asking good questions. Great. Okay. You guys are asking the $1 million question with the teaming. So give me a second on that one. Cost price is not required if you're on phase 1 and you're basically doing a domain expansion. At least what I've read is that you don't have to redo all of that. You might want to just double check that because I think you have the option to update your rates. And then CMC level 2 self-certified. I think the answer, I don't even want to answer that. I want to research whether you can be self-certified for level 2 because I think they're phasing that out, but I don't know that for sure. So I will find an answer to that one. Can a prime use past performance from a sub to qualify? Yes, they can. One note about subcontractor past performance. If you're using work that you did as a subcontractor, or if you're using work that you did as part of a JV, what you need to understand is that you're only permitted to claim the portion of the work that you actually did. So if you're on a $10 million, if the prime's contract was $10 million, but your portion of it was $2 million, you only get credit for that $2 million. You can't take credit for it being their federal prime work and the size of their contract. So you can also only take credit for the tasks you were assigned to do. So let's say they were doing engineering, but you were brought on to do program management. You don't get credit for the engineering tasks, only the portion of the work that you completed. Okay, can a company reuse a qualifying project they already used as a prime for one of the new domains? I think we're going to see more clarification with this in Q&A, but what the guidance right now says is that you cannot use a project cannot appear twice in the same IDIQ and same domain. So in theory, if you used a project before for small business T&E, it can't appear again in the small business T&E pool. It could appear in the small business administration domain, because then you don't have the crossing streams problem. Okay, and then, so backing up, so a small business teaming with a large business, the way that GSA looks at this is they assign a number of NICs to each domain, and they say, here's what we're doing. Here's the size standards for these NICs for the T&E domain. And in the solicitation in section C, you'll see that list. If you're a small business, the really simplistic teaming advice is you need to team with other small businesses, because what they're going to do, what GSA is going to do is they're going to look and they're going to say, is everybody on the team, they're applying for the T&E domain, is everybody on the team considered a small business in all of these NICS codes? If the answer is no, you won't be ineligible, but you won't receive that CLIN that corresponds to a NICS code for any NICS code where not everybody is a small business. So if you have somebody who's just a little bit bigger and bumps you out of that category, instead of getting 8, or I think it's like 13 on the T&E one, it's 8 for management advisory. So instead of getting the 8 CLINs for management and advisory, you might only get 6. And the size standards vary between the different domains. So you gotta look at that. But yeah, if you're a small business, you should be looking at teaming with similarly situated entities. Limitations on using a QP across multiple domains under a single IDIQ across multiple IDIQs. Again, make sure it doesn't appear, it can't appear in the same IDIQ and same domain twice. You can use it across multiple domains, because you can also use a relevant qualifying project in your T&E domain as a non-relevant qualifying project in M&A. Where we want you to take a really close look is if you're claiming relevance to multiple domains with one project and just making sure that passes the sniff test. But yes, you can, again, as long as you're not violating that only once per domain per IDIQ, you can reuse a project. And then If you are a subcontractor on a QP, does the JP6 get sent to the prime or the government client? It gets sent to the prime, but you have to provide the client or the government client's information, and that's all on the JP6 form. There's really specific instructions about who's permitted to sign, what to do if you can't get to that person. So there are some backup contingencies outlined there. But if you basically what they're looking for, if you kind of keep this in mind as a general rule of thumb, they need somebody with cognizance over your performance. They want you to get the form signed by someone who's familiar with the work that you did, so that if they need to pick up the phone or shoot off an email and say, hey, this company is claiming that they like put somebody on the moon. Can you attest to that? Like you signed the form. Is that for real? The person will say, yes, of course. Okay, I'm getting caught up here. How do you convert a sub case as a sub on their QP provided from 541.519 to show relevancy on the common domain? All right, if you are looking, NICS codes are one of those things where I want you to pay attention to them, but I don't want you to stress about them. You can use them if they help you. If they don't, you need to get into the statement of work in the PWS for the work that was actually done and show relevance that way. So one of the things that we like to do is pull up that PWS. If you work with us and you say, hey, I have this project, it was coded as 541.519, which is an IT NICS code, which is not relevant to OASIS Plus, right? Not automatically anyway. But if you did systems engineering on that, or if you did like database management, or there's a couple other nuances. If you look at the domain descriptions and the functional area descriptions, there's a whole list of little sub-bullets of like, basically says, things that relate to this domain may include, but are not limited to, and then you get that laundry list. And if you can pull out some keywords of the task that you did and link them back to that functional area, that's a pretty good way to establish relevance. Okay, and then the size standard by set aside contract or by domain. So it really, oh boy, you guys are still typing here as I'm catching up. This is a lot of fun actually. Okay. The size standard by set aside contract or by domain. It's by domain. So there's one like overarching NICS code for OASIS Plus, but again, the way that they're going to look at it is, are you a small business in all of the NICS codes that you're applying to that are relevant to the domain you're applying to, basically. Rumblings AI may be used for evaluation. Didn't see that. Any insights? Tip. Okay, so because this is not a written proposal, it kind of doesn't matter if they use AI. And in fact, I would love if Symphony had some AI embedded into it that made the whole process go faster. And I think it might be a little bit clear when we look at the next section to talk about this. So I'm going to put a pin in that question for a moment. Just real quick, notional timeline. This is probably a little bit aggressive for some of you, but I do think you could submit in a month, 5 weeks. If you are super organized. If you're doing a domain enhancement, this is probably realistic. So maybe another way to think about this is you could have your OASIS Plus Phase 2 proposal done by the time the next Outlander series comes out. So if you're looking for just a notional, how does this work? We would recommend that you start by just getting your projects together, do the project scoring, score each project individually, figure out which domain you want to go after, register for Symphony, make sure your SAM profile is up to date, and that's probably enough for week 1. In week 2, you can start getting into your actual document tagging. You want to get your project forms prepped. So if you need a JP3, if you need a JP6, you want to get all those signed, but you need to, what we encourage people to do is don't just fire off the JP3. Make sure you are set on which domains you're applying to and how you're going to use your project so that you only have to get that form signed once. The other thing that we encourage our clients to do is make sure that you have your PWS or whatever your supporting documentation is tagged before you go to the client, because it's a much easier conversation to go and say, hey, remember that work we did for you? We know it was a 541.519 NICS code, but we want to claim it as relevant to the T&E domain. And here's why. And then you show them the highlighted sections of the statement of work, and then they go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That's a much easier conversation to have than just sitting off a form and trusting that your very busy client has read through and understand all the nuance of the OASIS Plus solicitation. Please don't do that. Okay, so you've sent out your forms, they're getting signed. While you're waiting for those to come back in week 3, you can prep all of your business question. business factors. So things like your cost price, any of your other artifacts, your registrations, your certification that shows that you're CMMC level 2, all those good things, finalizing your teaming agreements and your documents. That's a great thing to do during week 3. In week 4, you should be getting your forms back. You're going to make sure that they all say what you thought they were going to say, that they're all signed. Please don't upload an unsigned document. GSA will not spend, I don't think, because they didn't do it during phase 1, they're not going to come back to you and go, hey, I think you missed a signature. They're just going to throw your project out. They are ruthless when it comes to this grading. So you have to make sure I's are dotted, T's are crossed, forms are signed. And then we always recommend doing a full review of all of your documents before you upload them to Symphony, because if you need to make an adjustment, if you didn't tag something quite right, if you forgot to tag something, you can't make edits to the forms once they're in Symphony. You have to do that outside of Symphony and then re-upload things. And so then that's why we encourage you just during week 5, take your time, get everything uploaded, get a fresh set of eyes in the system, walk through, open up every document, make sure that all of your tags match. So again, this is kind of an aggressive schedule, but you could do it in 4 to 5 weeks. Reasons to wait, right? We kind of talked about this earlier. If you are waiting on getting those forms signed, then your timeline is going to look a little bit different if people aren't prompt with those. Or if they have questions, you might have to walk them through and explain why your project should, be coded as something else. Not totally coded, but like just why it could be passed off as relevant to another domain. It is really important to note, you're not asking your clients to go into FPDS and change the actual NIX code of these projects. You're just showing relevance to a domain. So they don't have to like change any official records. They're just signing this form that says, yes, T&E type work or M&A type work or R&D type work was also done as a part of this contract. And then you might also choose to delay your submission if you have projects that aren't in contention just yet, but like maybe in 2 months, you'll hit that 6-month minimum runtime. And then there might be Q&A pending for you that would hurt your bid or change which projects you nominate. So I would just say generally, if you have questions, or if you plan on submitting questions that are going to affect your bid, wait until you get that first set of Q&A back before you hit submit. There are still some unknowns. Okay. Which domains say the most demand? That's a really interesting question. And it really does depend. There's been, I will say, I can share things anecdotally, right? Work is going to OASIS Plus. There are RFIs coming out. There are RFQs being released. Task orders are being awarded. There's not a great dashboard right now to show what work is migrating from OASIS proper to OASIS Plus. So that's a little bit of a blind spot unless you're on OASIS, and then you usually have a pretty good idea. For a lot of contractors, the ones I will say who are making best use of OASIS Plus are the ones who are not just trying to catch the bids as they come out, right? So like that's one strategy is you watch the RFIs, you respond to those, you engage the customers. But really, I think who's getting work are the people who are shaping the requests and driving work to the contract. So this is a competition is fairly cutthroat, right? I don't want to sugarcoat that. Like there's a lot of work to do once you get on OASIS Plus. And, we've also seen a lot of, nothing's coming out as LPTA, but that doesn't mean that it's not turning into LPTA, right? Because some of the domains are pretty saturated. So somewhere, I think, in one of our blogs, we had a tally going of how many companies had been awarded on each IDIQ in each domain. And that might just be something to take a look at so that you can say, okay, well, hold on, there's 850 companies here. How much work can I realistically expect? And that's not to discourage you from bidding, because I think everybody needs some kind of GSA vehicle in existence just based on the consolidation of contracting that we're seeing. But it might help calibrate your expectations and kick your BD team in the pants a little bit when it comes to capture and deliberate shaping to try and steer work to the vehicle. Because it's not one of those like, I can sit back and just, bid on something here and now and I'm gonna catch a fish. Like, no, it's a little bit more involved than that. Okay. Past performance, what counts as evidence? So if you went through phase 1, I don't want to sound super pessimistic, but one change that I want to make sure you're tracking, Previously, we could rely on the FPDS report to justify a lot of things. If you go back to Amendment 6 or Amendment 7 of the Phase 1 RFP, you'll notice that they have changed the order of the evidence section. So I just wanted to call attention to this. So now what the wording says is that offerers shall submit the following document, and they start with the contract award form. So whether that's your subcontract, whether that's the SF 1449, whatever your actual award form was, that's something that they want to see. My read of this is that they want to see that for all projects. That was something that we were submitting with most projects before, but I would say now you definitely need that signed award form. Make sure it's signed by your company and by the contracting officer. In addition to that, if necessary, you might also submit an FPDS report, a copy of the statement of work, project verification form if you need it to claim something that's not clear in the statement of work. You might do Section B with the cleanse. And then it says any other verifiable contract documentation. You can use the final proposal that you submitted in certain circumstances, but there's a whole list of things to use before you get to that point. So what I have here, the orange block at the top, is that kind of the standard QP that you're submitting is going to need some combination of these things. The first three are basically non-negotiable. Like you should be submitting the contract award form, a PWS or statement of work, and a CPARS or a JP6 for every QP that you have. Make sure you have at least those three documents. We would also encourage you to pull the FPDS report. You just need the most recent one, but that's going to help with like funding agency IDs and some of the other, like the NICS code. That's usually a really good place to find that, because sometimes it's just buried on the contract award forms. So if you think about it from the standpoint of, okay, I'm going to have most likely 5 qualifying projects, and I need 4 documents for each of those 5 things, you're already looking at 20 pieces of paper or 20 files, 20 separate files to upload. And we haven't even gotten into the more complicated kinds of evidence. We haven't gotten into business factors. We haven't gotten into federal prime experience. So at a minimum, every OASIS Plus submission is going to have about 35 files associated with it. So I just mentioned that for your planning purposes. So if you're thinking this is like, I'm just going to zip it all and send it in, like, oh no, not how it goes. Which you'll see as part of the Symphony 101. And guys, I'm sorry, because I know we're at 1 hour. I'm going to keep talking and I'm going to keep recording. So if you need to drop because you are a responsible person and you scheduled other things in your afternoon, totally understand. But I'm going to keep going so you can come back and watch this recording later. Okay, so for Symphony, real quick, I have the link here on the slide. It's the oasis.app.cloud.gov. You can only use your email address once. So if you are still with the same company that you submitted for phase 1, no problem. You've probably been in Symphony since then. If you are new to this or if you've changed companies, just keep in mind what you need to register is your email that you're going to use to verify that you have a real account and you're a real person. And then you need the company's UEI that you're supporting. So you need that to just register. When you log in, it's going to immediately take you to the dashboard. Do not touch anything here. You're going to get really excited. You're going to say, oh, I see my solicitation. I'm going to do it. Don't touch anything. You actually need to go up to the top where it says my company. And this is where you're going to start. So you're going to have to upload, when you establish your Symphony account, it's going to pull whatever's in sam.gov as the starting point. So if your UEI isn't right, if your cage code's not right, if your address isn't right, fix it in sam.gov early so that it has time to replicate in Symphony, because it's not an automatic update here. It can take the system a couple hours or a couple days, worst case, to replicate. But where you're going to start is just with the company information, and this is where you're going to be uploading a lot of your information. And then it gets pulled into the proposal and you'll do the specific tags. But before you get there, you have to put every project in, you have to put every certification in, and then the way it works is you go back to that dashboard module and you build your proposal. So again, best practices with Symphony, review all of those documents before you upload, because as soon as it's in the system, if you need to make a change, you have to delete it from Symphony and re-upload it, and then your file naming convention gets all dorked up. You can only use your email address once. I mentioned that, and that you need the UEI to register. And then make sure you have enough users. This is something that's come up. Nobody, well, I don't want to say nobody. I think many people were surprised by how long it took OASIS Plus Phase 1 to get awarded. I know we're still fighting through Polaris, right? So if you know me from that, like cheers to you. But we're still waiting for resolution on that contract. And it's difficult for whatever reason, difficult to add users once the proposals go in and the solicitations close. And I know this is continuously open, but just have more people with access in your system. It's not so that they can go in and fiddle with things. It's just so that you can get back into the system if, I don't know, your proposal manager makes a career pivot in the middle of your bid or 2 months after you submit. You don't want to be locked out because they do a lot of communication via the portal, so you have to maintain access there. Other best practices, use a tagging index for standardization. Make sure that when you're tagging something for domain relevance or integrated experience, that you're calling it the same thing every single time, because that's really going to simplify your proposal submission when you get to that stage. We have some recommended tags. If you work with us, we'll give you the cheat sheet. It makes it really simple to follow and make sure that you have good discipline in your documents. And then the other thing that we encourage you to do is just have a standardized file naming convention. And it can be really simple, right? Like your company name, the name of the project, and then what the document is. So just as an example, if I was bidding, I might say this is Trident's Rebel Support Project, FPDS. And then I know immediately when I sit in my document library, okay, I have a SOW, I have a PWS, or SOW or PWS, I have an FPDS record, I have a contract award form, I have a JP6. Like I have the 4 things I need for this project. I'm ready to move to the next phase. It just helps you stay organized as you go, because this is a lot of files that you're going to be working with. Areas to watch. So this automatic relevance and the NICs to new domains. Again, use it if it's helpful. Don't use it if it's not helpful. Don't say like, oh gosh, I have this thing, but it's a 541512 project. There's no way I can use it. Like, not so fast. There might be. It really depends on the work that was done. The big caveat here is that if your task order has a NICS code just by virtue of it being on an IDIQ where everything on that IDIQ gets the same NICS code, that's not good enough for automatic relevance. You still have to do your little 1,000-character narrative and tag some portions of the SOW to show that it was actually relevant to the domain where you're claiming it. Watch out for this delineation between M&A, business admin, human capital, financial services, some of these new domains. And I just mentioned that because before those other domains existed, a lot of that work we kind of classified under management and advisory. So just make sure that you're aligned to the domain where you actually want to provide services would be the advice there. Keep an eye on those dates for recency determination and project eligibility. For what it's worth, FTEs on OASIS Plus, the equivalent is considered 1,912 hours, and you might need that if you're trying to claim credits for scale based on FTE count instead of dollar value. So if in your project, maybe it was, $2 million annually, but you had a lot of folks who were fairly low rate, and you're trying to show that you had 20 FTEs, you could do that if you can show how many total labor hours you had. And if you divide that by 1912 and it ends up over the threshold, you could still get a point for scale. So I mentioned that in case you're in one of those one-off situations. And then again, kind of stomping on this, don't reuse projects in the same domain and solicitation. So if it's on small business T&E, don't put it on another small business T&E. And we're going to be keeping an eye on Q&A because I expect that, there's about 17 different permutations, ways you could ask this question. So we'll see if GSA does a little bit better job of explaining specific prohibitions, because it's also a little bit unrealistic to say, well, hey, if it got used on phase 1, that project is basically locked out for anybody else's use for the next, 5 to 7 years. But we'll see. Okay, other areas to watch, OTA documentation. We talked about this, right? Like even if you have a performer agreement that says that your company's doing it, if it gets awarded to the consortium, it's probably not going to be considered prime work for you. Teaming limitations. There are minimum project contributions from the protege. You have to do at least the protege has to contribute at least one qualifying project. Small businesses only in the small business domains. For terminated projects, this is one of those areas where, get into FPDS, see what it says, as if you can use a project that's been terminated as long as it meets the minimum thresholds, right? And then completed versus ongoing projects. We talked about this, showed you how to calculate where to look in FPDS for something that's ongoing versus something that's ended. And then the last bit of motherhood and apple pie, I say this on every webinar, and yet it's still probably going to trip somebody up, unfortunately. Don't trust Symphony to catch your gaps. You'll get some errors generated, like if you forget to, if you try to align something to a domain where it's not automatically relevant, like you might get a warning or an advisory in Symphony, but it's still going to let you submit. Symphony's not going to know if you uploaded the right file. It's just going to say, did you give me a file to look in? It's not going to know if your tags are right. So just because something says something in Symphony, it's not actually validated and true until it goes through GSA review and gets evaluated. So it's a good tool, but it is not foolproof. Okay, so what should you be doing now? Read that amendment. Read every single attachment to that amendment. Read it twice. Make sure you get into the nitty-gritty for your specific bidding situation. Update all your records. Make sure you get registered in that submission portal, which is Symphony. Get access to more users than you think. Do an eligibility check. This is an area where we can help if you're doing a domain enhancement. So basically, if you're a returning customer, we are doing those at a discount. If you're doing a standard eligibility check, the baseline price is $5,000. And it might get more complicated if you're doing multiple domains or if you're looking for small business and unrestricted, because again, we're just looking at scorecards. But what you get with that eligibility check is we're not just asking you to fill out a score sheet and then talking it over with you. Like, we're actually looking at your evidence. We're saying, send me your PWS. I'm going to grade this as though I were GSA, and I'm going to tell you what this says or what this doesn't say. I'm going to tell you what your options are in terms of how to align this to different domains. And I'm going to give you an honest, validated score of where you stand. And if you don't meet that threshold, what you can do to close the gap. Because sometimes it just works out that, you have really good performance on projects, but your projects just don't score well. So in that case, we might ask you to bring different ones. We might say, hey, you need a team, but before you have any conversations, you need to know that what you're looking for is a project that is relevant to this domain, has at least this many labor categories, includes cleared staff. Like, we can give you the script of what to go ask for so that you're not wasting time and making, having those conversations that never go anywhere because everybody kind of wants to keep an open mind about things. Like, this is a very binary, mathematically based conversation that you can have, and we can arm you with those facts to have it. Okay, and then back into the other things you should be doing, right? Get your documentation, make sure you have that contract award form, make sure you have the most recent version of it, especially if the value has changed and they've done any kind of modifications. Get that lineup together. We have a free project tracker that you can download from our website. And you can put every single project in there and you can see what was the assigned NICS code, what was the stop date, what was the value, like what's my average annual value. We can help you calculate that so that you know what's in the realm of the possible. Talk to your customers too, especially if you think you're going to have to get anything signed. Just let them know, like, hey, by the way, we're pursuing OASIS Plus. I'm probably going to be sending a project verification form your way. It'll have everything that you need there, and I'm happy to talk about it, but just wanted to give you a heads up. Goes a long way towards, that versus getting a cold email that says, hey, I need you to sign this. Like, well, what am I putting my name on, right? Like, start the conversation now, get their buy-in early so that your conversation for the signature down the road. Or if there's an amendment, right, and you have to go back and say, I'm so sorry, GSA changed the game a little bit and I need you to re-sign this. Talk through that. And then thinking through your teaming strategy, again, mostly for the small businesses, make sure that you're thinking about delivery too, right? So there's a difference between meeting the qualifying threshold and getting on OASIS Plus and then actually being able to bid and win things. So who's complementing your capabilities? Who do you trust? Who have you worked with before? Sample project tracker. Okay. And sorry, I saw your note again about subcontract. So really similar for subcontracts in terms of the documentation. You need your subcontract, something that outlines what the name of the project was, the start date, the end date, the tasks that you were assigned to complete. If that's all in a subcontract, great. If it's a subcontract and a subcontract PWS, then you need those things. And you still need a JP6 signed because you can't use the primes CPARs. So at a minimum, you need some kind of contract award form or subcontract award form, some kind of task list, and a JP6 at a minimum. You might need additional things like invoices or contract deliverables if you're trying to claim additional credits for any of those extra areas. So if you kind of keep that baseline in mind, I need something that awarded me the contract and showed the limitations of the project. I need something that shows the work that I did, and I need something that speaks to the quality of work I provided that's going to cover most of your bases. But again, if you work with us on an eligibility check, we're going to tell you, like, here's what it says in black and white, and here's where I think you should go get more evidence to reinforce your case. Okay, on Trident's, hopefully that answered it, John, but if you have more questions, let me know. Any additional, so sorry, if you go to our OASIS Plus hub, we have a whole hub. You can download the project tracker there. It is free. I think we ask for your email just so we can say hi, get in touch. This is kind of what it looks like. You can build your own if you need to. Ours has the formulas built in. And then again, if you have any questions at all, please get in touch with us on our website. We'd be happy to have a call with you. And then, do you need a past performance from the prime, or your existing document is sufficient? It really depends. So I want to make sure I'm answering the question that you asked. You said, do you need a past performance from the prime, or your existing document is sufficient? If you have enough relevant QPs, you don't need stuff from the prime, but your prime is going to need to vouch to the parts of the contract that you did. So whether that's on the JP6 or a JP3, there's going to have to be some conversation with the prime, and probably a signature that says, yes, this was your portion. You could use the prime's PWS, but again, you would need something that says, and here's the portion of the work that we completed, or that my company completed. The prime did tasks 1 through 6. We did 7, 8, and 9, something like that. When in doubt on OASIS Plus, getting a JP3 signed goes a long way towards closing the gap between claims and evidence, right? So I will just put that in your minds as well, that if you feel like there's any shadow of a doubt in your PWS or in your contract documentation, if there's errors in FPDS, right, because that does happen, or if there's a lag, get the JP3. Let's prep it, let's get it signed, and then you're above reproach. There's not a question in any evaluator's mind. Okay, just shows you what our hub looks like. So if you go to the Trident homepage, you go to contract vehicles, we got a whole drop down. If there's anything else in there that you're interested in, we can have a conversation about that too. I know everybody's talking about the AFRL Mac that's coming out. So we expect to have a blog published on that relatively soon. So we are tracking more things other than OASIS, but this is something that's really, really hot right now. So please do feel free to get in touch. We'd love to help you with this. You can send us an email at webinars@tridentproposals.com. I'm also just Rebecca@tridentproposals.com. Many of you, I see a lot of friendly faces on this webinar, so feel free to hit us up. We'll carve out some time for you to try and answer your questions, because again, it's hard to give one standard answer for everybody, because everybody's got a little bit of a different situation, and there is so much nuance between the domains. So happy to help you work through those. I'm going to stay on for a few more minutes, even though we're over time. So if you have additional questions, you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to get through those. And I know there was a question earlier about FastProp. You can visit our website. We have a whole section dedicated to that. I think we have some free templates you can download. If you're interested in course access, you should contact our sales manager, Kylie. She can talk to you more about what that online course looks like. It's self-paced. It's about 4.5 hours of video where we actually walk you through the modules. But there's also a book that you can buy on Amazon. So, but we do have some freebies that we can show you if you get in touch with Kylie, and that's Kiley. I'm looking to see if she's on the attendee list. And why are you giving out my email? No, she's fantastic. So if you get in touch with her, she can walk you through that.